And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment from very, very high above all the puerile and insipid forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday, and an incredibly busy Wednesday it is. Here in Sheridan, Wyoming, the Sheridan Chamber of Communists has decided to hold a legislative forum. Now, what we witnessed at the last legislative forum that was held, I guess it was Tuesday, Senate President Bo Beitman said that because the Senate killed the supplemental budget, they saved the state of Wyoming $1.3 billion. That's a pretty big number, and I wonder how they came up with all the math for that. Seems a little fuzzy to me, considering that the governor's request in the supplemental budget was a little bit north of $600 million. So unless the House of Representatives doubled the amount of money that was in the supplemental budget, it's pretty much impossible for the Senate to have saved $1.3 billion. The truth of the matter is, by killing the supplemental budget, we didn't spend around $75 million. You see, one of those numbers begins with a B, billion. One of them begins with an M, million. And the two are entirely different numbers. You know, I know that Wyoming education isn't all that it's cracked up to be, and our students really aren't excelling in math and English and any other subject, really. But I would expect that we should know the difference between billions and millions. Evidently, Bo Beitman doesn't. Now, to give you a little preview on what's coming on the podcast after today's live program, I have a great interview with author of the book Rules for Defeating Radicals, Chris Adamo. It's a great 30,000-foot view of what happened during the legislative session. And, you know, I think that too often we get all down in the weeds and look at all the minutia of all the bills that happened, when the truth is, if we just kind of take a step or two back and look at it holistically, we have a much better idea of what actually transpired during the legislative session. So that's what we're going to do on the podcast. It'll be published shortly after today's live program. I'm thinking about 10 o'clock. And then here in Sheridan, that's why I began with this whole segment. The Democrats are going to protest the legislative session, or at least the forum. And I'm going to try to get some pictures of their silly little protest. You know, there's only about 20 Democrats in the entire county of Sheridan. Well, actually, there's probably more than that. Actually, funny story. So a couple of years ago, actually several years ago, in Buffalo, we were getting ready for the fair parade. And if you're going to run for office, you have to be in the parade. It's a Johnson County thing. And if you're not in the parade, you're not going to get elected. So we're getting our float ready. And really, the only thing that my float was a beat up old pickup that I was going to sit in the back of. It ended up being wonderfully funny. And one of the folks that was helping me tapped me on the shoulder and said, well, David, be quiet. The Democrats are right there. And I said something to the effect, oh, don't worry about it. There's only 7 of them in the entire county. And I turn around and there's 14 of them sitting on the float, and the head Democrat was standing right behind me. And I said, okay, fine. There's 14 of you. Now, the truth is that Democrats are trying to make a push in the state of Wyoming. We talked about it yesterday on the live broadcast, but I don't really think it's going to go anywhere. So anyway, I'll take some pictures today of their minuscule protest at the legislative forum this afternoon. Actually, it's not this afternoon. It's over lunch, but I'll get some pictures for you, and we'll talk about it tomorrow on the program. On today's live episode, we've got some takeaways from the Wyoming media, what they saw during the legislative session. And then, of course, we have to talk about what newspapers think about themselves, their own self-aggrandizement. Now, I can't really fault them for that. If you're not going to toot your own horn, nobody else will. I do that often on Cowboy state politics. But the Wyoming media has a very skewed view of themselves, the importance of editorials in Wyoming newspapers. And then, of course, the Democrats are still melting down about the transgender agenda, even though it has been roundly rejected by voters. I mean, I think that you could tell that. It's pretty obvious from the last election. But I've got some great sound bites from a congressional hearing where the only elected so-called transgender, who is really a man pretending to be a woman, member of Congress, it's actually pretty funny. And then we're going to get in the Wayback Machine and go back to what the media said about Syria. Now, this is incredibly important because right now across the world, there are Christians that are being slaughtered in other far-flung places of the world. Living in America, we kind of have a different view of how Christians are treated the world over. And it's not just Christians. I mean, there are Muslims that are being slaughtered in Syria too. But here in America, we don't really quite understand that. We don't understand the oppression of an entire religion. So we're going to take a look back at what the media was saying about the ouster of Bashar al-Assad, and then we're going to look at what's happening today. And I can tell you for a fact, it's 2 entirely different things. But we begin this morning with the Wyoming Turkey Vulture in an article entitled 6 Takeaways from Just Finished Wyoming Legislative Session. And the first one is from Maggie Mullen from Wildfile, and I quote, "By any measure, the Wyoming legislature just completed a transformative session. In the House, the Hardline Freedom Caucus took control of a state House chamber for the first time in the United States. In the Senate, leadership stunned observers when they decided the upper chamber would not pass a supplemental budget. Another first for Wyoming." Now, I have a question. If the hard line of the conservatives end up being in power, are they still hard line, or do they represent the majority? Or can we still call them hard line? You see, this is a narrative that's been peddled by the Wyoming media for a really long time, that if you're conservative at all and you actually adhere to the principles that you espouse to your constituents, then of course you're hard line. If you're a leftist and you want to spend as much money as humanly possible, well, then no, you're normal. You're not hardline, you're normal. So the question is, since the conservatives are in power in the House of Representatives, are they still hardline? I'd say no, they're kind of in the majority, Maggie. Let's continue. During the 37-day session, lawmakers adopted a string of measures that could dramatically alter public life in Wyoming. The state is now set to embark on a universal private home or religious school voucher program while doing away with almost all gun-free zones. Legislators passed a major property tax cut with significant implications, not just for taxpayers, but for local government funding and services, and they showed an increased willingness to litigate national issues within the state's borders, approving legislation to crack down on illegal immigration and transgender rights. Now, let's just take this last paragraph a piece at a time. This universal private home religious school voucher program. First of all, it's $7,000 for families who make under $80,000 a year to educate their students however they see fit. But the Wyoming Constitution is still really, really clear. You can't give any state money to any sectarian organization. So the implication that any of this money could be used specifically for religious schools is really, it's a red herring to begin with, because like I said, the Wyoming Constitution is clear. You can't give any public money to sectarian organizations. But this is a narrative that the left has been peddling for a really long time, that the school voucher program is just going to send money to religious organizations. How terrible would that be? But, it's against the Wyoming Constitution. And, really, I think that this school voucher program is going to have one really big unintended consequence, and that is to drive up the cost of private education. Anytime you get the government involved in anything, it drives up costs. Let's look at, the medical industry. Because we have insurance companies and the government says you have to, the government funded Medicare and Medicaid, prices have been driven through the roof. So now when you go get a prescription, insulin is a really good example, though there's a cap on it. Insulin has been around. It hasn't changed since its invention or since its discovery, however you want to put it. And still the price is outrageous when you go to a hospital. Now, when you buy it through the pharmacy, it's $35 a vial. That's what I pay for it. But anyway, the cost of medical stays, hospital stays, any sort of medical procedure through the roof, simply because you have Medicare and Medicaid. Anytime you get the government involved, the price goes up. The insurance industry is another great example. The government says you have to have insurance if you're going to drive a car. And so insurance companies drive their prices through the roof. The same is going to hold true for private education. When you have a guaranteed $7,000 going to any number of providers, it's going to drive up the cost of education. So let's see here. The next part of this, legislators passed a major property tax cut with significant implications not just for taxpayers, but for local government funding and services. The media has been fear-mongering about Senate File 69 since before it was passed. The truth is, it's only going to result in a single-digit decrease in revenue from residential property taxes the state over. When I looked at the numbers, I didn't see a single county that was over 10%. And the reason for that is most counties don't get the majority of their funding through residential property taxes. It comes through, property taxes on, oil and gas, and on sales taxes. But only a small percentage of it comes from residential property taxes. Here in Sheridan County, I think that 25% tax cut is going to amount to 3 or 4% of the overall county revenue. And Sheridan County is one of the higher ones. And so really, the implications of this tax cut are not going to be that big statewide. There isn't a budget anywhere that exists anywhere in any industry or government or your own personal budget that couldn't sustain a 10% hit right off the top. You can adjust to that. 10%, no big deal. The state of Wyoming, after, right around COVID, they cut, I think the governor said he wanted a 10% cut. All the services got funded. It really wasn't that dramatic, even though the media made it seem like it was a huge deal. The last part of this first paragraph is also interesting. And they showed an increased willingness to litigate national issues within the state's border, approving legislation to crack down on illegal immigration and transgender rights. Okay, first of all, every state is a border state now. Thank you, President Joe Biden. To assert anything else is just flat not telling the truth. In Sweetwater County, I think it was an article out yesterday that ICE arrested 12 illegal immigrants. If you go to Jackson, that town is chock full of immigrants, most of whom I would say are probably not here legally. There are illegal immigrants in just about every single Wyoming county, and to say that this is just a national issue is ridiculous. Secondarily, the legislature really didn't crack down on illegal immigration all that much. Pretty much the only thing they did is ban sanctuary cities, and later on in the article, they claim that there are no sanctuary cities in Wyoming. I beg to differ. It's recently changed, but it wasn't that long ago where the sheriff of Jackson said that he wasn't going to detain illegal immigrants. If you ask me, that pretty much looks, sounds, and acts like a sanctuary city to me. And the other thing the legislature did is passed a bill that Wyoming is not going to recognize driver's licenses issued to illegal immigrants from other states. So really, there wasn't a crackdown on illegal immigration. The significant bill that would have been a crackdown, Senate File 124, which would have made it a crime to harbor an illegal alien, that one was killed on committee of the whole in the Senate. So no, Maggie Mullen, there was not a crackdown on illegal immigration. And the whole transgender rights thing, the governor is yet to sign the What is a Woman Act. I don't know if he will or not. And then what was passed was an expansion of and I always forget the name of this bill, but basically it's the Fairness in Women's Sports Act from a couple of years ago. And just to say that, and here is, this infuriates me to no end. There are no such thing as transgender rights, gay rights, women's rights, men's rights. There are rights, period. The U.S. Constitution grants everyone the same set of rights. In the Wyoming Constitution, it says that all members of the human race are equal. There are no special or specific rights that are granted to any other constituency group. We all have to be treated the same, or you end up having a favoritory system which advantages one group at the expense of another. So just to try to, push this narrative that somehow the Wyoming legislature is, invading on transgender rights, it's absolutely ridiculous. But you can't really expect anything else from the Wyoming media. Of course, they're going to push that media narrative. We'll continue with this article and their takeaways when we come back from the break. But first, an absolutely outrageous profit timeout. Back in a minute. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live. You can listen to the program on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, pretty much everywhere. It's almost like I'm omnipresent. If you miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics Live, you can always go to the live replay, which is located at the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, under the live replay button. You can listen to the live program every Tuesday through Thursday. Well, that's right now during the legislative session, but coming soon, Tuesday through Friday at 8 a.m. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live. I'm your host, David Iverson, firmly and permanently ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone. Welcome back to the program, my friends. As you can see, I'm all Texas Rangered up. I finally got a chance to listen to a preseason game yesterday where my Rangers absolutely walloped the Los Angeles Angels, and rightfully so. I mean, the Angels are terrible. But I mean, I guess it doesn't really say too much about my Texas Rangers. But I finally got to listen to a game, and so baseball season for me is in full swing. So I had to put on the jersey, had to wear the hat. I mean, it's just, you know how excited I get about baseball. And you know, had I been thinking, I would have recorded a couple sound bites for you. I'll try to do that with more regularity as we move forward in the baseball season. Now, before the break, we were talking about this ridiculous article, the 6 takeaways from the legislative session. And of course, it's absolutely written from a leftist perspective. You know, according to leftists, anything that conservatives do is an outrage. How dare we talk about national issues, which really aren't national issues, or we are invade on transgender rights, which really aren't transgender rights. Everybody has the same rights. I mean, it's absolutely incredible when you pick these things apart. Take this next section. They're talking about the governor's vetoes. Let's see here. At publishing time, well, let's back up a minute. Quote, the Senate's decision to tank the budget sank the added language with it, but the reversal by appropriators was a hint of what was to come. Now, what they're talking about is the House Appropriations Committee pretty much reversed a lot of the Governor Gordon's spending, specifically with his energy matching funds, which just yesterday he reinstated using his line item veto. It wasn't really the Senate Appropriations Committee that did hardly any of that. It was the House. Several members of the House Appropriations Committee have told me that really it was the House that did the lion's share of the work. That Senator Kangaroo Mike Giroux, who pretty much led the Senate Appropriations contingent, really didn't do anything. And so when the Senate tanked the budget, which, by the way, one question, riddle me this, riddle me that, Bo Biteman, or any of you sycophants that support him, please explain the math behind how the Senate saved the state $1.3 billion. I'm dying to know. And if someone doesn't ask Bo Biteman or our pal Ken or Lori or Tom to explain the math behind this today, I'm going to have to ask him myself. And we've got two more forums coming up. If you're in Sheridan today, the Chamber of Communists is holding a legislative forum at the Ramada. I believe the whole thing starts at 11:30. It's $25 to get into the door, and that's for lunch. So anyway, at the Ramada, 11:30, you can say hello to the protesters on your way in, which is what I'm going to do. Continuing on, quote, at publishing time, Gordon had vetoed 7 bills and exercised his line item veto powers on the 8th. The legislature attempted to override 6 of those rejections. 5 of those attempts stuck. Now, one of the more significant pieces of legislation that came out of this year's session was the ultrasound bill. Senate File 60, House Bill 64. That was the ban on, saying if you're going to get a chemical abortion, then you have to have an ultrasound with it. The governor vetoed it originally, and then the House overrode his veto. So, I know I rag on the Senate a lot, but there were some good things that came out of it. The House Bill 64 was a good one. The ban on gun-free zones, that was another great bill. So it's not to say that all was bad. Let's see here. The next one, blurring the lines on federal immigration enforcement. Don't you love how they title this article? And I quote, the legislature continued testing the limits of how much a state can involve itself in illegal immigration enforcement. Historically, the realm of the federal government. Wyoming lawmakers passed a bill opposing sanctuary cities and counties, though none exist in Wyoming. I covered that at the top of the program. I'm pretty sure that Laramie would qualify, that Teton County, the whole county, would qualify, probably Casper. So this is just an errant assertion by the Wyoming Tribune Eagle, and actually I think this is in conjunction with Wildfile. But anyway, let's see here. And they adopted a measure that would invalidate driver's licenses issued to undocumented immigrants by as many as 20 states and the District of Columbia. Questions abound about how the law will be enforced and how it might impact Wyoming's standing with the states whose lawful licenses it will now refuse to honor. That's not a crackdown on illegal immigration. Those are minor measures. The crackdown was killed by the super conservative Senate. That was Senate File 124, which would have made it a crime to harbor an illegal alien. Let's see here. The legislature's fervor on the issue matches national trends, according to an expert in immigration policy. Both red and blue governed states are starting to lean deeper into immigration law, passing bills to make their states less or more welcoming to undocumented migrants and immigrant communities generally. First of all, you're not an undocumented migrant if you're here illegally. You are an illegal alien, an illegal immigrant, to be generous. Let's see here. The next one, Senate defeats federal land grab. Now, out of the entire legislative session, all the bills that were killed, all the bills that were passed, this is the one that the media focuses in on. Senate defeats federal land grab, and I quote, Wyoming senators narrowly defeated a resolution demanding control of all federal land in Wyoming except Yellowstone National Park. Although Senate Joint Resolution 2, resolution demanding equal footing, was only an expression of Wyoming's desires, it drew widespread attention and criticism because of the similar recent efforts in the West. So, it's a resolution. It has no power whatsoever. It wouldn't change policy in any way, shape, or form. And this is the bill that the Wyoming media zeroes in on. Totally bizarre. The next one, controversial wildlife bills beat back in bulk. During the 2025 general session, some of Wyoming's lawmakers' desires to affect wildlife management locked horns with others' unwillingness to tell biologists and wardens how to do their jobs. Now, that's some fair reporting there. A number of controversial or divisive bills succeeded, including a measure declassifying otters, and another upping penalties for wildlife torture, and a change in the law that allows Wyoming Game and Fish Department to regulate guided fishing. But on balance, the most hot-button proposals did not survive. LaBarge Republican Mike Schmid, a freshman, came out hot to trot in proposing House Bill 286, Mountain Lion Hunting Season Changes, which sought to completely overhaul how mountain lions are managed across Wyoming. It ran into overwhelming opposition and went nowhere. Okay, so again, out of all the things that happen, these are the bills that that they go after. Let's see here. Fossil fuels. And, you know, it really... I shouldn't even have brought this article simply because they're not focusing on the real issues that Wyoming citizens care about. Senate File 69, the tax cut, though they did mention that one, there was a lot of controversy surrounding that one and way more fodder for them to write about. But if you notice, they didn't. So let's see here. We're down at the bottom of the hour, pretty close to the break. So let's go ahead and take another break. And when we come back, we're going to hit an editorial in the Wyoming Turkey Vulture on how important the newspaper thinks the newspaper's editorials are. So we're going to do that in just a second. And don't forget, we've got the ridiculous sound bites coming out of Congress. Apparently, some people didn't get the memo that we're tired of the transgender agenda. I'll bring those to you when we come back. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics live every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on the Independence Network. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Concerned about the future of Wyoming, but unsure how to help? Honor Wyoming is giving you the chance to create real, lasting influence. And it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. The Honor Wyoming Bill Tracker is designed to empower Wyoming voters. We're cutting through the noise and equipping you with all the info you need to keep tabs on Wyoming lawmakers, as well as the tools to take action on the issues that matter to you most. Keeping a close eye on key legislation in Cheyenne, we've made it easy to stay informed by providing real-time bill updates and timely take action alerts. Our one-click links make it easy to email key lawmakers at the right time. All you have to do is click and your voice will be heard. Ensuring lawmakers are listening to the people they serve year-round. Protecting the Wyoming way isn't a spectator sport, and voting is only half the story. Get involved today and do your part. With the Honor Wyoming Bill Tracker, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3.
Cowboy State Politics Live on YouTube, on Facebook, X, and on Rumble. Don't forget about the Cowboy State Politics podcast, which will be published directly after Cowboy State Politics Live, about 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a great interview with author of the book, Rules for Defeating Radicals, Chris Adamo, a 30,000-foot view of what happened during the legislative session. If you want to be part of today's program, the phone number here in the studio is 307-374-8989. 307-374-8989. If there's something on your mind, something you want to opine about, go ahead and give me a call. One more time, that phone number is 307-374-8989. Now, all program, I have been teasing this little editorial from the Wyoming Turkey Vulture, the essential role of editorials in local newspapers. See, newspapers have to continue to validate their own legitimacy. They have to continually remind you of how important their role in everything is, instead of just doing their job and allowing the free market to take hold. Where the Wyoming media lost all of their influence is in lying to people. Wyoming media, even in Wyoming, has not been telling you the truth for a really long time. For example, if you look through both the Wyoming Turkey Vulture and the Red Star this morning, you really won't see that much emphasis on anything that happened during the legislative session. We just finished it. Legislators around the state are going to their own town halls, talking with their constituents. There's news stories all over the place, and yet the Wyoming media, the newspapers, the press, refuses to acknowledge them. From the Wyoming Turkey Vulture, and I quote, "The recent decision to drop a lawsuit against a Mississippi newspaper is a victory for press freedom and a reminder of the important role editorials play in local journalism. While this case appears to be resolved, it brings back into focus the ongoing fight to protect editorial independence. Editorials serve as the cornerstone of an informed public discussion, offering perspectives on critical local issues, holding leaders accountable, and ensuring that community voices are heard. At their best, editorials are a service to the community. They often provide historical context, explain complex policies, and encourage public discourse. In today's fast-changing media landscape, where trust in national outlets is wavering, local newspapers continue to be the most relied on source of news and analyses. The Trust in Media study by America's Newspapers and Coda Ventures found that 85% of Americans believe the local press is essential in sustaining democracy. 80% says it's important to have local newspaper providing news about their community, and 76% are concerned about the spread of false or inaccurate news. I wonder who they surveyed to get those results, because by and large, the American public does not trust the media anymore. All you have to do is look at the ratings of any of the big four media networks to find out that that is absolutely the truth. And when it comes to local newspapers, as far as I know, there isn't a single paper in the state of Wyoming that is conservative in any way, shape, or form. I can't think of a single one of them. Every single other paper is entirely left-leaning. The Turkey Vulture, the Pravda on the Platte, Casper Star Tribune, they really don't do news anymore anyway, so I don't even know why we should include them in the list, but they are a newspaper. The Jackson Hole News and Guide. Now, there's a leftist rag if I've ever seen one. All of them are critical of conservatives. All of them have referred to the Freedom Caucus or conservatives at large as hardline or right-wing or some other derisive term. The Buffalo Bulletin, this is a great example, and I know this one best because I used to live in Buffalo for the longest time. But their editorial page, really, it is very, 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 very rare that they'll publish a letter that is in any way critical of the Bulletin or is in any way in support of conservatives. The paper's editorial, and I suppose I should define two things here, because the piece in the Turkey Vulture is using the term editorial to describe two different things. You have letters to the editor, which I guess are editorials in the paper, and then you have the newspaper's opinion, which is also put out by the editorial board. So we have two different things here, and almost always, and again, there are exceptions to this, but almost always the term is used synonymously for both of them. And the letters that are published are usually in support of the paper's position. The Buffalo Bulletin, during COVID, never once published an editorial critical of Mark Gordon's mask mandate. Every single editorial was how you must wear masks, how you have to abide by all the mandates, you have to get the vaccine. Clearly left-leaning. The other case is on taxes. At least as far as I'm aware, the Buffalo Bulletin has never once published an editorial that is critical of any tax whatsoever. And newspapers across the state pretty much mirror that. The Kogi Enterprise, the Powell Tribune. The one exception to that, and this just came to my mind, is the Riverton Ranger. They have published a few things that are, kind of conservative, that are critical of some Democrat leaning, and but it's just the exception to the rule, right? It doesn't represent the majority of papers in Wyoming, and the truth be told, papers are across the state, actually across the nation, are decreasing in circulation because most people don't get their news from your everyday daily newspaper, and the reason for that is, by the time it's published and printed and distributed, that's old news. Online outlets are much faster to respond to any sort of, event or news story that comes up. So why would you pay any attention to a newspaper when you can just go online and see the newest story? But even so, in the Cowboy State, the Cowboy State Daily, which is far and away the most prominent online media source, they're decidedly left-leaning too. All you got to do is read any of Trotsky's work, and you're going to find out that they cling to the left just about as hard as they possibly can. So let's see here. Back to the piece. Editorials in an era of information overload. And I quote, "With so much news circulating, some credible, some not, editorials serve as a guide for readers to looking to better understand the world around them. They don't tell people what to think. Instead, they give people more to think about by introducing new perspectives and deeper context on local issues. While some argue that editorials introduce bias, local publishers strive to ensure they offer balance by presenting thoughtful analysis that goes beyond sound bites and social media debates." Now, here's the thing. I have heard a number of people denigrate the use of sound bites. Ogden Driscoll is the one that comes to mind. And he actually told me himself, "I don't like the way that you use sound bites." When I asked him why, he said, "Well, they're all taken out of context." To which I replied, give me one example. Give me one example of where I've taken somebody out of context, twisted their meaning, used a soundbite to completely flip things around. Now, name one instance where I've done that. You don't have to, because the leftists in Wyoming, they say enough stupid stuff as it is that you don't have to twist their meaning. You just have to find the right soundbite. And my friends, it is fertile ground, because most of these politicians in Wyoming don't get any pushback from their local paper, which, by the way, one of the roles of your local paper is to hold elected officials accountable. Hold them accountable to what they do. But instead, the Sheridan Press is a good example of this. They throw in with the elected representatives and just continue to toe their line. For example, guess how many times Representative Ken Pendergraft has been contacted by Sheridan Media? I should have the Jeopardy music up here. But the answer to that question is 0. How many times have they contacted Marilyn Connolly, as they were calling her on the floor of the House, or super uber duper conservative Bo Biteman, or any of the other liberals? All the time. But a conservative? Nope, can't talk to him. The same held true last session. Over and over, just about every single issue of the paper had an editorial or a piece on Barry Crago or Dave Kinski. Maybe there was one time they contacted Representative Mark Jennings or Ken Pendergraft. But the truth is, your local paper is just as biased as the national Big Four media. And so there's a reason why their circulation is going down, because most people don't trust them. It's the Press Association, absolutely ridiculous. And by the way, Cowboy State Politics cannot, or Cowboy State Daily cannot be part of the Press Association. Why? Because we don't print a paper. How outdated and prehistoric could they possibly be? Let's see here. Another statewide news. Cynthia Lummis is going to run for re-election in 2026. There's a long-winded piece by Trotsky Wolfson trying to figure out the ins and outs of Cynthia Lummis running for office. Here's what you need to know. First, I don't really think that there's a credible challenger to Senator Lummis. I think if there is, it's going to end up being a lot like Reed Reisner running against John Barrasso. You don't have a prayer anywhere. Lummis is pretty well entrenched in the Senate, and I can't think of a single person that would mount a credible challenge to her. So I don't even really think that that's worth talking about, except to note that she still is running for re-election. The article goes on to talk to, several other people. Rebecca Fitzgerald. We all remember her. Old Red, who was the mouthpiece of the Wyoming caucus. She's trying to talk about Harriet Hageman running for governor. Well, the longer that Harriet, holds off on announcing whether or not she'll run, it decreases the amount of fundraising that people can do. It's called strategy. I think if Harriet Hageman came back home to run for governor, she'd walk away with it. I don't think there's any question about that. If she chooses to stay in the Wyoming House, I think what you're going to see is a pretty crowded field running for governor. I think that's a foregone conclusion. There's already a number of people who have indicated their interest in running for governor. Brent Bean has already announced. This guy down in Cheyenne, who I have no idea who he is. I need to get him on the program and interview him, but he says he's running for governor too. And there's probably going to be some other people that jump into the race. But one of the things that conservatives need to do, if Harriet is not going to run for governor, is we need to find one candidate. One conservative candidate, that's it, and just run that one person. I don't care if they get in a room and leg wrestle or arm wrestle or whatever they have to do, but we just need one conservative. We don't need a repeat of Mark Gordon getting elected. What I mean by that is it was a pretty crowded field when Mark Gordon first ran for governor. Harriet Hageman was in the race, Foster Freeze, Sam Galiotis. There was a number of people, and it ended up splitting the vote. And Mark Gordon got elected with, I think it was like 34% of the vote or something like that. Really small number. So a lot of this hinges on what Harriet Hageman is going to do. I think it's pretty cut and dried. Nobody's going to run against Cynthia Lummis if they have half a brain. And, there's no big mystery here. To some national news. And I guess Cynthia Lummis is kind of national news, but some more non-necessarily Wyoming-related stuff. I don't know if you know this or not, but there is a member of Congress who claims to be transgender. That is, a man pretending to be a woman in Congress. From Breitbart News, Democrat has meltdown in House hearing after Republican refers to transgender Representative Sarah McBride as Mr. And I quote, Democrat Representative Bill Keating erupted at a House meeting on Tuesday after Republican Representative Keith Self properly identified transgender Representative so-called Sarah McBride, a male pretending to be a female, as Mr. The episode happened during a House Foreign Affairs Committee on the Europe Subcommittee and is the latest incident of Republican lawmakers rejecting McBride's self-proclaimed female identity. McBride was elected as the first so-called transgender identifying member of Congress in November of 2024. The hearing was ultimately adjourned after Keating responded to the supposed misgendering of McBride by yelling and pounding his fist. McBride remained quiet during the exchange. Here is that exchange from the committee in Congress. Listen to this.
Recognize the representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Keating, also wonderful.
Mr. Chairman, could you repeat your introduction again, please?
Okay, all right. Hold on. You'll notice that McBride didn't say anything about being called Mr. It was the other Democrat, Bill Keating, that came to his defense. But McBride didn't say a word about it, didn't object or anything, just started going into his question. But let's listen to the rest, what this crazy Democrat had to say.
Yes, we have set the standard on the floor of the House, and I'm simply.
What is that standard, Mr. Chairman?
Would
you repeat what you just said when you introduced a duly elected representative from the United States of America? Please.
I will. The representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Mr. Chairman, you are out of order. Mr. Chairman, have you no decency? I've come to know you a little bit, but this is not decent.
We will continue this.
You will not continue it with me unless you introduce a duly elected representative the right way.
This hearing is adjourned.
So be it. We're done with the meeting. Well, the Democrat representative was introduced properly. It's a man pretending to be a woman and calling himself Sarah. But his pal, Democrat Representative Bill Keating, had to come to his defense. And I quote, let's see here. Yeah, indeed. Now, following the exchange, Self posted a statement on X, tripling down on his commitment to biological reality. Quote, "It is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female," Self said. Indeed, President Donald Trump issued an executive order on the first day of his second term called Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. That order states that, quote, "It is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female, and that these sexes are not changeable and are grounded in fundamental and incontrovertible reality." McBride previously made headlines after Nancy Mace proposed a measure preventing transgender identifying males from using women's restrooms at the U.S. Capitol. In February, Representative Mary Miller also introduced McBride as the gentleman from Delaware. Now, here is that exchange, and this one is interesting because, again, this man pretending to be a woman in Congress doesn't object to being called Mr. Listen to this.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Delaware, Mr. McBride, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When I was elected,
See? No objection from the person that's actually involved in it. Even he realizes the legitimacy of the president's executive order and with the policy of Congress. Here's another example, also from Breitbart. Department of Agriculture cancels grant that recognizes listen to this, the menstrual cycles of transgender men. Men do not have menstrual cycles, nor can men give birth. And I quote, "The Department of Agriculture has canceled a grant that recognizes menstrual cycles in transgender men, highlighted by the Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins last week. The grant, awarded by the USDA, and think about that, a grant awarded by the U.S. government to study something that does not exist. Anyway, the grant awarded by the USDA was specifically for the Southern University Agricultural and Mechanical College in Louisiana. A description of the grant states that, in part, it is the first occurrence of menstruation occurs at approximately 12 years of age and ends with menopause at roughly 51 years of age. Quote, "A woman will have a monthly menstrual cycle for about 40 years of her life, averaging to about 450 periods over the course of her lifetime." It continues, contending what is also important to recognize is that transgender men and people with masculine gender identities, intersex and non-binary persons may also menstruate. Piggybacking off of the Department of Government efficiency efforts, Rollins announced that they have canceled that grant worth a whopping $600,000. My friends, there are only two genders, male and female, and that the U.S. government under Joe Biden was providing grants to try to prove otherwise is absolutely ridiculous. We have to get back to reality, my friends. There are no third genders or fifth genders or 27 genders. As Kathy Connolly, former representative in the state of Wyoming, tried to claim that in a University of Wyoming hearing that we've known for a long time that there are 72 genders. Yeah, whatever. There's only two, and the sooner that we realize it, the better, and we can get back to reality. I mean, it's the Democrats can't let loose of any of this insanity. They have to continue with the failed rhetoric, the failed narratives that lost them the election. I hope they do. I say, keep on going, fellas and ladies, and whomever else you pretend to be. Keep going. We'll see what the American public does about it. We'll finish up in a minute. Christmas is over, and all of the fun holiday cheer has been had. And what are we all left with? Frigid Wyoming weather. Below freezing temperatures that you still have to go out in. That's right, you do have to go back to work at one point or another. And not to scare you, but think about this. Every single morning, you get to scrape the ice off of your windshield. Now, while I can't do anything with that, I can make sure that your feet stay nice and toasty warm while you're doing it. All you have to do is order a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. And to get you a pair of them, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Cowboy State Politics is only going to continue to expand. The program is only going to continue to get bigger and stronger each and every day. You can listen to the show, to the live program on YouTube, Facebook, X, on Rumble. And if you miss an episode, just go to the Cowboy State Politics website, click on the link that says live replay, and you can listen to every single one of the live episodes. Last year, the media across the world was celebrating that Bashar al-Assad, the longtime dictator of Syria, had been overthrown. And at the time, the media was saying that the whole of Syria was going to be liberated, that everybody was celebrating freedom. A classic mistake that the media always makes, to assume that those folks that throw off a dictator are in some way freedom fighters. We've done the same thing to Vladimir Zelensky over in Ukraine. They called him the next coming of George Washington, even though he had canceled elections and canceled the press and banned religious meetings and closed down churches. Clearly something George Washington would do. But the press always does this. They jump the gun and they try to proclaim somebody who they have no idea who they really are as the second coming of the founding fathers. Such is the case with Syria. The media jumped on the bandwagon and said that whomever threw off this dictator, well, they're interested in liberating all of the oppressed people of Syria. Now, here's a soundbite from NBC News last year. Now, just listen. Listen to what they say. These people are fighting for freedom, don't you know?
In the main square in Damascus, thousands gathered to cheer the end of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. Entire families came to witness history in the making.
Syrians have been coming from all over the country to gather here. Hello, I'm from the United States. Welcome. Thank you very much. NBC News. Welcome. How are you feeling today?
Very happy.
Very happy.
Very, very happy.
It seems to be the sentiment here. Everyone says very happy.
Yes.
Wow. So this is a symbol of everything that has transpired here over the last really just 2 weeks.
Celebration.
The rebel forces moved into Damascus, and the government and its armed forces simply melted away. We've seen uniforms on the ground. This tank was just abandoned.
Now the tank is in the hands of the people it was used to repress.
Yeah.
There is one word I'm hearing over and over again. It is Hurriya, Arabic.
All right, Arabic for freedom. And listen to the fireworks, the AK-47 shooting off. I mean, clearly these are the people that are going to be fighting for freedom. But unfortunately, they're also the same type of people that are slaughtering their opposition. From Breitbart News, human rights groups say that Syria jihadis tell Christians, "You're next," amid the Alawite slaughter. Bashar al-Assad was an Alawite Shia Muslim. And the folks, the freedom fighters that you just heard that soundbite about, yeah, they're slaughtering their the Shia Muslims in Syria, and Christians are next. And I quote, humanitarian groups helping persecuted Christians shared reports this week of Islamic extremists attacking and threatening the remaining Christian minority in Syria, warning they were next after the elimination of the Alawite Shia Muslims. Shia experienced a sudden eruption of violence against the Alawites in its coastal territories this weekend. Attacks described as revenge against the minority for perceived support of ousted dictator Bashar al-Assad. Assad and his family are Alawites, a minority sect within Shia Islam. The Sunni jihadis in the country consider all who share that identity opposed to their goals. Those jihadists have been emboldened by Assad's ouster in December, which occurred after the al-Qaeda offshoot Hayat Tahrir al-Sham launched a massively successful conquest campaign in late November of 2024. Another example of the media really not doing their research and not paying attention to the folks that are actually in power. First of all, you're an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. I don't really think that you're that great of a person. Also, the U.S. government recognized that group as a terrorist organization. And all of a sudden, the media says, oh no, it's all about freedom. Well, it's freedom for the Sunni Shia, the Sunni jihadis. That's who's going to have freedom to be able to do what they want and slaughter anybody that doesn't agree with them. My friends, we need to pray for the folks over in Syria, Christians that are about to be slaughtered, the Alawites that already were slaughtered, and we need to pray for actual freedom over there. And also, we need to pray for the news to start doing their job, or at least somebody like myself to come along and tell the truth about what's happening. That's the only way that you're going to get any change in the world, is if we know who these people are. And, I mean, if you look at the heat that Cowboy state politics has taken during the session, after the session, right now, because I told the truth about Bo Beitman, that's what you can expect. But that's what I'm in the business for, is to tell the truth and to call out these redcoats, whether they're in Syria or they're in the Republican Party or in the Wyoming Senate or in my own home county. We've burned through another busy broadcast hour on today's program, my friends. Thank you for listening. Don't forget about the Cowboy State Politics podcast. It'll be published right around 10 a.m. this morning, right after today's broadcast. Also, make sure that if you miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics Live, go back to the website, go to live replay, and you can listen to them all right there. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. See you tomorrow, my friends.